Thank you. I'd like to recognize now Ms. Jayapal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for your testimony and for your long work on critical issues to ensure that education is accessible for everyone across the country. For working families, post-secondary education, including trade schools and community college, represent a pathway to economic security. But the cost can be just so out of reach for so many, even after receiving Pell Grants. In fact, 60% of Pell recipients still receive federal student loans. And although students rely on loans to make the difference, higher education has to always be worth its economic benefits. The burden of student loan debt makes that very difficult to achieve, even for those without a bachelor's degree. 1/3 of borrowers have debt, but no degree. And I appreciated the earlier conversation between Mr. Cordray and my colleague across the aisle about the importance of trade school, any kind of higher education, trade school, community college, absolutely critical. We are talking about higher education that provides additional skills for people to be able to make the best of themselves and contribute to the economy. So let me start with Undersecretary Qual. We both know how transformational a degree or certificate is for working families and how student debt limits those benefits. And I thought it would be helpful today to just run through why student debt has emerged as the crisis that it is. How much have college costs risen over the last 20 years? Your microphone.
Beg your pardon. At some colleges, costs have doubled or even tripled.
And have federal investments in keeping higher ed affordable for low and middle income families kept up with those trends?
They have not. The purchasing power of the Pell Grant has declined steadily in recent decades.
Do you know what that percentage is in terms of Pell, what it covers?
It's currently roughly a quarter of the cost of attending a public four-year university.
It's actually gone from 75% of cost to 28%, I think, if that's correct.
That sounds correct.
And if the federal government hasn't kept up with rising costs, then what about state investments?
Well, no, states have substantially cut back on spending on public colleges and universities, which is where 3/4 of our students go.
I know that when I was in the Washington State Senate, we looked at the fact that the state used to cover 75% of a public four-year college, and we were down to about half. Now, we increased some of that spending while I was there. So basically, while previous generations have enjoyed federal and state investment in keeping higher ed affordable, today's students are paying more, not because they're irresponsible, not because they did something that they didn't intend to do, but because the government has slowly reduced our contribution to keeping it affordable. Many of my Republican colleagues opposing President Biden's plan of canceling up to $20,000 in student debt have actually enjoyed those investments from the federal government to get their degrees, and in some cases, they paid 3 times less what college costs today. Republicans had no problem prioritizing $757 billion in PPP forgiveness, where half of those loans went to the top 20% of richest families, and $22 million to at least 12 Republican members of Congress who are currently opposing student debt cancellation. If Congress made those same investments in keeping higher ed costs low for working families and helping them avoid student debt, Mr. Qual, how would that have impacted the economy?
Well, we would presumably have many more students with college educations, all types of colleges, as you noted, trade schools, four-year colleges, advanced degrees, and that would create greater economic growth, greater shared prosperity, and an economy we would all benefit from.
An economy where we all benefit. I want to just respond to some of the comments made earlier by my colleagues that we must treat all institutions the same regardless of tax status. My colleagues across the aisle have repeatedly suggested that it's somehow unfair or unwise to apply accountability standards solely to for-profit institutions, but that argument completely undermines the reality or ignores the reality that the sectors already operate under very different oversight and accountability structures. States have direct governance authority over public institutions, and private nonprofit institutions are operated by trustees who are legally committed to the public interest. Only in the for-profit sector can college leaders benefit personally from the operations of their institutions. So I see that my time is almost out, but let me just quickly ask. The Department of Education has recognized their responsibility to prevent abuses of taxpayer dollars by proposing a new gainful employment rule. How would this rule ensure that federal student aid dollars like Pell and direct loans help working families and strengthen our nation?
Well, it would set standards for earnings and for debt affordability at career programs and for-profit colleges. And we expect to see colleges improve the value that they're offering students. And if they can't, students have better choices elsewhere.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield